This video considers third-degree price discrimination, or what I'm also going to call direct price discrimination. The idea of direct price discrimination is that the firm is going to take actions itself to divide up its customers into different groups or different segments, according to what it thinks is their willingness to pay. The basic idea is that the firm can use some observable characteristics of its customers to divide them up into these different groups. And so the idea is that those different groups are going to have a different willingness or ability to pay, and perhaps a different sensitivity to price. And the firm can take advantage of that by setting different prices for these different groups. Those different prices are going to be set according to some estimate of willingness and ability to pay and sensitivity to price, or price elasticity of demand. Now, in order to do this, we have some prerequisites. There are some conditions that need to be met. First, obviously the firm needs some information about how demand actually differs among these different groups of buyers. We don't know anything about individuals so much as we know about how individuals with different characteristics differ. So we can't carry out first degree or a perfect price discrimination, but we know at least that on average, people in different groups are systematically different from each other. It also has to be the case that we can sort our customers into these different groups without making too many mistakes and without it costing us a lot to identify who is in what group. And of course, like any kind of price discrimination, we can't have the buyers selling amongst themselves. Okay, what basic principles am I going to assume here? I'm going to assume that marginal costs are the same for all buyers. So the differences are on the buyer's side in terms of their willingness to pay and their price elasticity of demand. I'm also going to suppose that if we can estimate the demands of these different types of buyers, then what we can do is we can set profit maximizing prices for each group. And those profit maximizing prices are going to be thought of in exactly the same way as we thought of profit maximizing prices for a firm that set just a single price. So the profit maximizing firm is going to compare marginal revenue with marginal cost in deciding how much it wants to sell. In this case, we're going to be selling different amounts to different groups of people who have different kinds of demands. And so essentially what we're doing is we're just dividing up the market and creating a number of different markets out of our customers, and we're getting our prices that way. By dividing up our buyers like this and creating a bunch of different markets, we're going to be producing higher profits than we would if we restricted ourselves to charging just a single price to everybody. So let's just consider a simple picture that illustrates the basic idea. Suppose that we can divide up our customers into two different groups. Those with a high willingness to pay and relatively low sensitivity to price. Perhaps, for example, they're a group with higher incomes on average. And this other group maybe has lower incomes and therefore a lower willingness to pay. And they may also then be relatively more sensitive to price changes. So their demand would be more elastic. Note, however, that the marginal cost of supplying each type of customer is the same. But what we want to do is to charge them different prices. So for the group that's relatively price insensitive and has a high willingness to pay, we'd like to charge them a higher price than this more price-sensitive group. You can imagine that if we restricted ourselves to charging just a single price in the market and we didn't discriminate among these different groups, we would be foregoing some profit contribution for this group that has higher willingness to pay. And we could, at the same time, be pricing out of the market some of these people who are willing to pay more than marginal cost, and therefore they're willing to offer us some profit contribution. And we can do better if we split them up into these two different groups, charging a lower price for those with lower willingness to pay, but still adding some profit contribution here. So the claim is that our total profit contribution from these two different groups is going to be higher than would be the case if we just charged a single price. Well, there's lots of examples, as we've seen earlier, of this kind of price discrimination. One example I found was just looking at prices charged by the Canada Games Aquatic Centre in Uptown St. John. So what the Aquatic Centre has done is it's divided up its customers into these different groups or different segments. So it's charging a different price to seniors than it is to younger adults, but it will charge a lower price to students, who it also considers to be adults, but a somewhat different category. I suppose the idea is that students may not have full-time jobs, so they've got less income and less ability to pay. The same would hold for children as well. And infants and toddlers obviously don't have any ability to pay themselves, but they may be brought there by adults. And so they're charged a relatively small price. I think it would be fair to say that the marginal cost of supplying services to all of these groups is probably essentially zero. And what we're doing is just taking advantage of their different willingness to pay. So virtually all of these prices represent a profit contribution if marginal cost is zero. You'll notice that there's also a family admission price, which is a different kind of price discrimination. So this is really a kind of quantity discount. And it's also a kind of mixed bundling as well. You can buy essentially a family bundle, or one could pay for individual adults and children. Another kind of third-degree price discrimination is to divide the customers up according to where they live. So here's an example. If we just compare the prices of this book called India Conquered, A History of British India, we can see that the prices in India are quite a bit different from the prices in Canada. I looked up the most recent price on Amazon, Amazon.ca and Amazon India, and converted the price here in rupees into the Canadian dollar price at the current exchange rate. So you can see that the prices of the hardcover and the paperback are about 50% less in India than they are in Canada. The price for the Kindle edition is even cheaper in India, in relative terms at least. It's only a third of the price that it is in Canada, roughly. So why would there be this kind of price discrimination? Again, I think it has to do with estimates of differences in willingness to pay. If average incomes in India are lower, then you would expect that you could charge a lower price. But as long as the price that you're charging is higher than marginal cost, there is still a profit contribution to be had. And obviously for the electronic edition, the Kindle edition, the marginal cost is essentially zero. So any price here is a profit contribution. So this kind of price discrimination based on the geographic location of customers is really quite common. We see price differences as well between even Canada and the United States, even though those seem to be quite similar countries. Well, that's the end of my discussion of third-degree price discrimination. Just to sum up, the basic idea is that based on observable characteristics, we can divide up or segment our customers into different groups and charge them different prices. And the result is a profit contribution that would be greater than if we did not segment the market in that way.